everyone, my name is Lindsay Franz, and I'm here today to share with you the prologue and first chapter of my novel, The Upworld. The Upworld is a young adult dystopian science fantasy novel that centers around Erilyn and her cat Luna, and Erilyn's journey through various friendships and betrayals. Erilyn is a 16-year-old girl who is telekinetic and telepathic, and as you can imagine, that causes her a bit of trouble. A little bit about me. I am a mother of 2 children. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, so we'll hope they don't interrupt this video. My husband and I both work for a public school system. I teach high school English and I love it. And I'm currently working on the sequel to The Upworld, along with a couple of other projects with the Hidden Worlds Book Club and Hidden Worlds Anthology. So let's jump right in. The prologue is very short. Prologue. Stones bounced off my body and laughter bounced off walls. My hands glowed with the iridescent blood of glowworms, my blood mixing with it. Heat welled in my belly and burst forth from my hands, causing the earth to shake. Laughter turned to screams and ricocheted against the inside of my skull. All I could see was her face, terrified and white as rocks fell all around. I ran, wind whipped through my hair. The cave thinned and thinned. A fiery, furry monster painted on the wall, a warning to stop. Just past it, white light so brilliant my eyes and heart ached. I fell into the light, the earth trembling beneath me, and stared up into eternity. And now chapter 1, which is entitled Awake. Autumn air cooled the sweat on my skin as my heart pounded against my ribs painfully. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed the heels of my hands into them so hard I saw a rainbow of stars. It was the same dream I'd had for weeks on end, a distorted memory of the night I left my home in the caves of Citadel and came Upworld. It had been 4 years, and I still wasn't sure if I had killed any of the children that had been with me. Through the starry rainbow exploding behind my closed eyes, I could still see Ayana's face in the darkness, her mouth wide in terror as she screamed, rocks falling all around. I pressed my hands into my eyes harder until the image faded away. I forced my eyes open and focused on the pine branches above me as the stars blinked out, focused on the holes in the grass mats I'd woven and tied to the branches to keep out the rain. I slowed my breathing, like Rosemary had taught me, and tried to focus. The smell of the pine needles and sap, the feel of my large cat's belly pressing into my side as she took deep sleep breaths, the way the light filtered through the holes in the mat and trickled down to me. I exhaled slowly and closed my eyes. My heart wasn't racing anymore. The echoes of their screams were nothing but a memory again. Next to me, Luna, my serval cat, woke. She yawned and stretched, the muscles beneath her thick white fur rippling. Luna chirped at me, her voice both delicate and fierce, to say good morning. I sat up and she rubbed the side of her body against me, her tail curling around my neck as she slipped under the pine branches and disappeared into the woods. I pushed myself to standing, the mat-covered branches well above my head, and winced. My nails had almost bitten through the soft flesh of my palms as I slept. I stretched my hand, feeling the little crescent-shaped indentions ache. I slipped between the pine branches and stretched into the cool morning air, working out the final kinks in my spine from my nightmare. The air was spicy with the smell of drying leaves. Uncovering the fire pit, I got a small fire going. Using a dented metal pan, I scooped water from the tiny stream that fed my pond, adding some broken needles from the pine tree for tea. Rosemary had always told me the longer you watched the pot, the longer it would take to boil. So I sat, closed my eyes, and let the tiny flames dance across the backs of my eyelids. My hands curled into fists, and I forced them to lie flat on my knees instead. Some days were harder than others to outrun the ghosts of my past. I knew that the only way to move past it was to let myself really truly remember for a single moment, like intensely watching a shooting star as it streaked across the sky before it fizzled out. I gripped my knees with my sore hands, took a breath, and let the shooting stars fly. Memories played out on the back of my eyelids, dancing with the flames and shadows. With each inhale came a single vivid memory, and with each exhale I let it go for one more day. The laughter and screams of children, hands covered in glowing blue-green blood, lavender and mint, the feel of Rosemary's cool, rough hand against my forehead, The moon hanging bright white in a sea of infinite stars, blindingly bright. Baby Luna resting in the palm of my hand, Rosemary's house in flames. Rosemary, a halo of sunlight in her silver hair. With my last exhale, I opened my eyes. I was able to push the memories back into whatever dark corner of my brain they lived for another day, just as Rosemary had taught me to do when I first started waking from night terrors. My mind was clear, the scent of pine tea wafted toward me, and along with it, my name, whispered on the wind. Erilyn. Muscles tense to run or fight, I looked all around. This wasn't the first time I'd heard voices whispering from the trees. I let my awareness, a part of me that could sense the area around me without using my eyes or ears, search for anyone nearby who might have spoken, but there was no one. I shook my head. I poured tea into a tin cup I'd found my first summer on my own. It had been half buried in the woods next to the foundation of an old cinder stone house. The exposed part of the cup had been bleached by sun and scratched clean by the elements, but the buried part still showed part of the picture that had been painted on it so many dozens of years before. While the tea cooled, I examined the cup as I did every morning. I hated this cup. Next to the handle was a group of children holding hands, wearing rags and no shoes. I could never look at them for very long without feeling that same anger and fear that caused the earthquake all those years ago, even though these children were nothing at all like the children in Citadel. Beside them sat a man holding a jug with XXX written across it. The man, with some kind of grass clenched between his gapped teeth, was smiling, drunk. He looked stupid, and I hated him most of all. Above the stupid, awful people were the letters Luegrass, bluegrass. I turned the cup so that I could only see the scuffed blank metal. The first sip burned my tongue, but the tea was rich and eased that gnawing ache of hunger that had started deep in my belly. I sighed as I mentally went over the food I had available for the day. It was time to start rationing for winter. The sun was fully up now and shining through the tall oak and maple branches that reached over the top of my clearing like a tent. The leaves were starting to change, crimson and gold. I loved how they could look so soft and delicate and like they were on fire all at once. Even after being Upworld for 4 years, I still wasn't used to all the color and how it changed day by day. I finished my tea as Luna returned from her hunt. She tucked her large white and gray head under my hand and bumped my shoulder. She was brilliant white and speckled with gray spots. She was the most beautiful creature I'd ever seen, and my only friend. Rosemary had given her to me the week after she was born. She had been solid white then. The rest of her litter had been gold and black, so her mother had refused to let her nurse. Instead, I fed her with goat's milk and a spoon. She was only a few weeks old when the Wilden killed Rosemary and burned her house to the ground. I stroked Luna's head, rubbing her large, soft ears between my fingers. She was content, happy, her aura a deep, satiated purple. When I petted her, I could feel what she felt, could see her mood, her aura like a light around her. I'd been able to do that my whole life. It was how I knew no one in Citadel wanted me there. It was why leaving, even under duress, hadn't been a tough choice. Citadel was a city of caverns and tunnels, some carved by us, some there already, that all led to a primary central cabin called the village square. I never understood why it was called a square when it was circular. There was a stone statue of the founder, a man whose face was stern but full of hope, carved from the earth itself right in the center. Stairs carved into the wall spiraled up from the floor all the way to the top. The wealthiest families lived on the top levels, away from the noise and commotion of the town center. Beside me, Luna growled and pawed my hand, her claws retracted. Just like I could read her, she could read me. I ran my fingers through the thick coat around her neck and shoulders, grateful for her warmth and comfort. I gazed down at my tan fingers, lost in Luna's bright white fur. Her vivid whiteness reminded me of the people in Citadel. Everyone there had white blonde hair and skin that was nearly the same color, with eyes that were either icy blue or pink. Everyone except me. My eyes were closer to the color of stone, and though I'd been fair-skinned then, I had always been darker than anyone else below ground. Rosemary told me later that my hair reminded her of honey. Rosemary, from my first day with her, had shown me that she loved me, something I'd never really experienced before or since. She'd found me and rescued me after I left Citadel and almost died because I didn't know how to live in the Upworld. I was only a child. I'd left because I'd made a mistake and let Ayanna, who was the chief's daughter, know what I could do. I'd read her thoughts and it scared her, so she and the others chased me out. I shook my head and stood. The past was gone and the present was here and waiting. I stretched and dumped soggy pine needles into the pond, then rinsed my cup, holding it under and watching the pictures of those awful people blur beneath the greenish water. Luna followed me, forever my lovely white shadow. Luna, what are we to do today? The air gobbled up my words. It had been 4 years, and I still half expected to hear my words bounce back to me from stone. She stared up at me and yawned, showing off her pink tongue and long, sharp teeth. No, it's not time to sleep. I walked to check a few plants I grew in my clearing. I looked back at her because she often liked to dig and roll where I pruned, but she was already asleep in a shaft of sunlight next to the fire. I gathered a few ripe peppers and greens and dug up sweet potatoes. There was something calming about digging my hands into the soil even when it was cold. I felt less alone, almost like someone was holding my hand. Sometimes I would work my fingers into the earth and just sit there listening, feeling. But it was already getting too cold for that. Now the cold earth made my fingers ache if I left them there too long. After I finished, I covered the ground around the plants with forest litter. My apple tree held fruit, and I piled dry leaves near the base before climbing it. I crawled out onto the lowest, thickest branch. I tossed apples as gently as I could onto the leaf pile, wincing when I would hear one had split. This had been a good fruit year, thanks to a lot of rain. From where I stood, I could see the upper part of my pine where I'd tied the grass mats. The mats were starting to wear holes between the needles. They needed to be redone if I were to stay hidden. As I worked, Ayanna's terrified face, and then Rosemary's, flames behind her, popped into my head again. I paused to squeeze the bridge of my nose. It was never this hard to separate myself from the past. A breeze shifted my hair. Looking up at the sky, I sniffed the air. It was going to storm, or at least rain. I needed to go on a run for supplies before the rain hit, and running had always cleared my head. I would cross the big field to see if any of the trees on the other side still held fruit. The Wilden had been camped across the field the last time I went a few weeks earlier. They would be gone now, and would stay gone until the end of autumn. Hopefully they'd left something good behind, tools or clothes that had been forgotten or lost as they moved on. I grabbed my pack, a discarded Wilden treasure, tied it around my shoulder so that it rested on my hip, and rubbed the rough cloth with my finger. I put an apple and some nuts in one of the pockets and drank deeply from my tiny stream. I covered the fire with a flat stone to keep any tendrils of smoke in and checked for Luna. She was up and beside me so quickly, I wondered if she'd only been faking sleep. As I left the clearing, I was careful not to break any branches and leave as few footprints as possible. Luna darted around me, climbing trees and jumping from branch to branch before rejoining me on the ground. She loved going on supply runs. I kept an easy pace, warming up my muscles until I got to my first marker, a giant metal post that disappeared up into the foliage. Rosemary had shown me things like this, and other pre-war remnants. This one had once held a huge sign telling people where something was. Now it was just something that didn't belong, being slowly covered by vines. After we passed the post, we picked up speed, as if the earth and wind were propelling us along. When I was finally running, the thoughts that had been lurking behind my eyes started to melt away. I focused on the sounds of my feet hitting the earth, of the bright streaks of white as Luna moved quickly and silently all around me. As the wind whipped by, so did an awareness of all the animals around me. Darting points of yellow light were birds up in the canopy. Still, warm, lavender bodies, startled by my passing, were deer or rabbits, huddling with their young. The excited orange blurs in trees, only growing still as Luna got close, were chipmunks and squirrels. It If it were warmer still, there would be more. The blue and green of snakes and frogs, and the trees would be saturated with a greater number of birds. For a flash, I thought I felt the red presence of hunting coyotes or wolves somewhere behind me. But if they were there, they were gone quickly. I didn't know these animals like I knew Luna, but being able to find them had saved me from a run-in with a big cat or wolf more than once. In some way, these points of light were like my friends, and seeing them as I ran felt like visiting family after a long time away. Today was a good day for this, cool and crisp. To keep my past from catching me, I needed the present to be vivid and bright. I ran, bathing in the range of color and emotion I sensed all around as I made my way to the field, letting the sound of my steadily beating heart dictate the cadence of my feet. Luna and I reached the edge of the woods and stopped almost at once. After being beneath the shadowed trees for so long, the golden grass of the field was like sunlight itself and difficult to look at directly. It was midday, and the noon sun was intermittently covered by rapidly moving clouds as the storm got closer. I took a deep breath. It would be a few hours still before the rain. Luna took a moment to clean dirt from her paws while I caught my breath and pulled some dried fruit from my pack. Chewing it, I grimaced at how tough it had gotten. Luna looked up, and I patted the tree closest to me, an ancient silver maple that was my second landmark because it reminded me of the maple in my clearing. Luna chirped and darted up the trunk to hide near the top in sun-dappled shadows. I followed her up and stopped on the tallest branch that would hold me, then stretched to pet her before turning my attention to the field. Clouds passed overhead and darkened the grass in shifting waves. At its height, the grass in this particular field reached above my head. But before I could cross it to reach the fruit trees that waited on the other side, I needed to see the other side to make sure it was safe. The field was huge, the other side just a smudge on the horizon, though the trees there were just as big and old as the trees here. With my eyes closed, I took a deep breath and focused on my heartbeat. After a moment, my vision sped across the field and traveled further than my eyes could, an ability I hadn't discovered until I'd come Upworld. It was hard to control. I had to find a spot to focus on, like an anchor, or it would keep moving, racing, darting around. I needed to make sure no one was there before I crossed to the fruit trees on that side. No one lived there, but 4 times a year, near the solstice and equinox of each season, a caravan of Wilden came through and camped in the field for a week or so. They'd been here 3 weeks ago, right around the autumn equinox, so they should be gone, but with the Wilden, I never took anything for granted. I expected to see flattened grass and the litter they always left behind when my sight settled. Instead, my stomach lurched and I clung to the tree I was in. My sight swung around, looking at Wilden children and adults, sleeping, fighting, and waiting for food from the fire. They had never stayed this long before. I could almost smell the putrid stink that followed them. I tried to direct my vision to see what was going on outside their camp, see if they were readying to leave, but I couldn't control what I saw once I anchored myself. Each time this happened, I had to stifle a surge of panic. I didn't like being out of control. When I opened my eyes, my vision returned to normal. The ground tilted and shifted for a moment before settling as I adjusted to being back in my own head. Above me, Luna chirped. Erilyn. My name on the wind again. I looked around, but still didn't see anyone. It was louder this time, and that worried me. I'd been hearing that voice a lot over the last few weeks. It had started 3 years ago, after Rosemary died, but it was getting worse. Maybe I'd been alone too long. Erilyn. Shaking my head, I rubbed my shoulder up against my ear. I looked back with just my eyes to where I now knew the Wilden were. Maybe, since the Wilden were there, the animals would leave the fruit trees alone. There were still a few weeks before snow. I decided to wait a few hours to see if they moved out in the afternoon. If it looked like they were readying to leave, I'd come back in a day or two. I still had time. It wasn't cold enough to start worrying yet. Leaning my head back against the tree, I closed my eyes to wait. My stomach growled, and I dug my fingertips into my belly to distract myself from the feeling, saving my apple for the trip home. I let my mind wander to the animals around me, the yellow spots of light that were birds nesting, the darting orange squirrels. I focused on them, counting them like stars, until I fell asleep. Thank you for sticking with me through the prologue and chapter 1 of my book, The Upworld. If you liked it, you can order it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble's website, or linebyline.com. And you can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and I would love to connect with you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.